Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take the sources you've shared with us, the historical texts, the economic data, all of it, and really unpack what's going on.
And today, we're tackling a massive one, the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, and it's a state that it defies any easy label you try to put on it.
Yeah.
You might think, okay, Music City, Elvis, the Grand Ole Opry.
Right, the cultural stuff.
Exactly. But the sources we've gone through paint a picture of a place forged by just intense conflict, world-changing scientific secrecy, and these deep, deep geographical divides that, still shape everything there today.
It's the ultimate American crossroads state, I think. Geographically, it's sitting right at this intersection of Appalachia, the upland South, and then, you get over to the western part, and it starts to feel a lot like the deep South.
That internal tension, that's what makes it so fascinating to dig into.
For sure. And just to start with a staggering geographical fact you might not know, Tennessee is completely landlocked.
Right, no coastline.
No coastline, yet it borders 8 other states. 8. The only other state that does that is Missouri.
Wow.
Which just highlights its historical role. It wasn't just a place. It was a critical corridor connecting the East Coast to the Midwest and the South.
8 states? That's just incredible connectivity. And it was admitted to the Union fairly early on, right? The 16th state?
1796. But you're right. Its identity was really cemented in conflict.
I'm always struck by that nickname, the volunteer state. It's not just some quaint saying. It sounds like it was earned the hard way.
It was. It comes primarily from 2 early conflicts. First, the War of 1812, where just massive numbers of Tennesseans volunteered to fight, especially in the campaigns led by Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
And then it happened again during the Mexican-American War. The federal government put out a call for volunteers, and the state's quota was, I think, about 2,800.
And they exceeded it?
They exceeded it by a lot. Something like 30,000 Tennesseans showed up to volunteer. It just cemented that reputation.
That history of action is so clear. But before we get into all that, let's go even further back. The name itself, Tennessee. Where on earth did that come from?
It's a great question because the name is actually older than the state. It's not something the settlers came up with.
Okay, so it's a native name.
It is. It derives most directly from a Cherokee town. The town was called Tanasi.
Tanasi.
Kanasit in the Cherokee syllabary. It was located in what's now Monroe County, right there on the little Tennessee River.
We often just assume these place names are Cherokee, but I saw in the linguistic research that the root might go even deeper than that.
It does, and this is what's so fascinating. The Cherokee likely adapted the name from an even earlier group. The evidence points to the Yuchi people, who speak a completely different language.
Language isolate.
Exactly. And the proposed Yuchi term is Tanasi-ji.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, the literal translation is something like Brother Waters' place. But a more lyrical way to put it is where the waters meet.
Where the waters meet. I mean, considering the state is cut into 3 parts by these massive river systems, the Tennessee, the Cumberland, the Mississippi, that is just a profoundly perfect description of the land itself.
The geography is baked right into the name. And the modern spelling, Tennessee, that gets standardized a bit later, it's usually attributed to the governor of South Carolina, James Glenn.
When was this?
In the 1750s. He started using that spelling in his official letters, and it just sort of stuck. It became the common name for the whole region, which would then become the Southwest Territory, and finally, in 1796, the state of Tennessee.
The story of this land, even before Europeans showed up, it's one of just constant movement, constant redefinition. So let's trace that back to the very beginning.
We have to go back about 12,000 years. That's when we see the first evidence of Paleo-Indians in the area. These were hunter-gatherers, following the migrating game herds at the end of the last ice age.
And Middle Tennessee specifically was a hot spot for them.
An ecological gold mine. It was incredibly rich with megafauna. We're talking mastodons, giant sloths. That made it a really crucial and highly valued hunting ground for thousands of years.
And as the climate warms up and stabilizes, you see human societies start to evolve. The sources break it down into these distinct cultural phases.
Absolutely. So after the Paleo-Indian period, you get the Archaic period. This is where people started settling down a bit more, developing more sophisticated hunting and gathering techniques.
And then comes the Woodland period.
Right. And the Woodland period is the big shift. This is where agriculture begins. We see the first cultivation of crops like squash, corn, gourds.
This is a total change in how people live.
A revolutionary change. And with that settled lifestyle comes another development. They start building the first ceremonial and burial mounds that you still see across the region today.
Which leads directly into the most sophisticated of these pre-contact cultures, the Mississippian period.
This period, roughly from 800 to 1600 AD, is the peak. You see the rise of these complex, highly organized chiefdoms. These were not small bands of people. They were structured societies building enormous, elaborate ceremonial centers, like the Pinson Mounds or the Old Stone Fort. It shows a really significant level of social organization.
And then, in the 16th century, everything changes. The Spanish arrive.
You have figures like Hernando de Soto, Tristan de Luna, Juan Pardo. They're all marching through this territory.
What are they looking for? Gold.
Gold, glory, a route to Mexico. They encounter groups like the Muskogee Creek, the Yuchi, the Shawnee. But the immediate devastating effect of their arrival wasn't conquest.
It was disease.
Catastrophic disease. The sources are so clear on this. Smallpox, measles, influenza, these viruses just ripped through the native trade networks. So by the early 1700s, before widespread Anglo-American settlement even really began, much of the original population had been wiped out or scattered.
So when the Cherokee start moving into East Tennessee, they're migrating into a region that's, in a way, partially empty.
Precisely. The group known as the Overhill Cherokee moved into East Tennessee from Virginia and the Carolinas in the late 17th century. They were likely being pushed by pressures from European settlements on the coast and, seeking new, safer lands.
And that led to conflict with the groups that were still there.
Fierce territorial conflict. In the early 18th century, they fought and eventually expelled the Muskogee Creek, the Yuchi, and the Shawnee from most of the area. The Chickasaw, however, maintained a really strong presence in West Tennessee and stayed largely out of that particular conflict.
This political void, especially in Middle Tennessee, basically opens the door for the colonial frontier to push in, and the French get there first.
The French were masters of the river systems. They saw the strategic value immediately. They set up a fur trading post at a salt lick in 1714, which they called French Lick.
The future site of Nashville.
The very spot. And they also built a fort on the Mississippi River bluffs in 1739, Fort Assumption, which is modern-day Memphis. They were trying to control the trade and counter the influence of the Chickasaw.
And the British had to respond to that.
They did. Their counter-move was Fort Loudon, built in 1756. This was a massive undertaking. At the time, it was the westernmost British outpost in all of North America.
But it didn't last long.
No. Tensions with their Cherokee allies over land and resources just boiled over. The Cherokee laid siege to the fort, and it surrendered in 1760. A lot of the soldiers were killed shortly after. It was a disaster for the British.
And after that, the British Crown tried to put a stop to this westward push, right? The Proclamation of 1763.
They tried. The proclamation forbade any settlement west of the Appalachians, but you just couldn't stop it. The long hunters, the land speculators, the settlers, they kept pouring into the valleys of East Tennessee anyway.
This movement of these fiercely independent, self-starting people leads us to a really crucial moment in American history, one that I think often gets overlooked, the Watauga Association.
This is where it gets really interesting for anyone studying American governance. By 1772, you have these settlers, mostly Scotch-Irish, who have pushed so far west, they find themselves completely outside the jurisdiction of North Carolina or Virginia.
They're in a lawless land.
Essentially, yeah. And they realized they needed some kind of order. So they didn't just form a militia, they formed a government.
A constitutional government.
They wrote and adopted the Articles of the Watauga Association, which is now widely seen as the very first written constitutional government established by European Americans west of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a true act of political autonomy. They set up courts, they registered land deeds, they established rules for the common good.
And this is all happening years before the Declaration of Independence.
Years before. It's this incredible moment of frontier constitutionalism. Now, once the revolution started, they did attach themselves to North Carolina for protection. But the road from there to statehood was anything but smooth.
It was a decade of political chaos.
Total chaos. In 1784, North Carolina temporarily ceded the land to the federal government to try and pay off its war debts. The settlers there did not want to wait around in limbo.
So they took matters into their own hands again.
They did. They declared themselves an independent state, the state of Franklin, named after Benjamin Franklin, and they petitioned Congress to join the Union.
And Congress said no?
Congress wasn't interested. The whole thing collapsed into about 4 years of internal skirmishes and governance failure. It was a mess. By 1788, the counties had rejoined North Carolina.
So when did it finally become a U.S. territory?
North Carolina finally ceded the land for good in 1790. Congress organized it as the Southwest Territory, and just 6 years later, in June of 1796, Tennessee was admitted as the 16th state. The census taken at that time showed a population that included over 10,000 enslaved people.
And that number right there immediately sets the stage for the defining conflict of the 19th century. And we have to focus on how the state's geography just poured gasoline on that fire.
The whole antebellum era was shaped by one thing: land acquisition. And the single most important event was the Jackson Purchase of 1818.
Negotiated by Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Jackson and Isaac Shelby. They negotiated a treaty that secured all of West Tennessee from the Chickasaw people. This opened up this massive, contiguous block of incredibly rich, flat, fertile land.
So how did getting this new land just fundamentally change the state's power dynamics?
It dramatically intensified the fracture that was already there. The new flatlands in West Tennessee, combined with the fertile river valleys of Middle Tennessee, were absolutely perfect for growing cash crops. Cotton, tobacco, hemp, crops that demanded massive enslaved labor forces. This created a powerful, politically dominant planter class that aligned itself completely with the Deep South. The economy was slavery-based agrarianism, period.
But East Tennessee, with the Appalachian Mountains, was completely different.
A world apart. The geography there, the ridge and valley system, it just didn't support large-scale plantation farming. The economy was mostly small subsistence farms and some small-scale industry like iron production.
And that led to a totally different political culture.
A culture rooted in rugged individualism and, crucially, a surprisingly strong early abolition movement.
We're talking about abolitionists operating inside a slave state decades before the Civil War.
Yes, and this is so important. A man named Elihu Embry, as early as 1819, was publishing a newspaper in Jonesboro called The Emancipator. It was the nation's very first newspaper dedicated exclusively to the abolition of slavery.
The bravery of that is just staggering, publishing that in the heart of the upland South.
It speaks volumes about the unique political defiance of East Tennessee. And this division, East versus Middle and West, it is the absolute key to understanding Tennessee in Civil War.
And as the state deepened its commitment to slavery, the forced removal of the remaining native populations reached its tragic end.
The Trail of Tears, which happened mostly between 1838 and 1839, is just a profound stain on American history. The Cherokee had tried everything. They adopted a written constitution. They tried to assimilate politically.
It didn't matter.
It didn't matter. The U.S. government forcibly removed thousands of Cherokees from their ancestral homes in southeastern Tennessee. And this included removing the thousands of black slaves the Cherokee themselves owned, as they too were a slave-holding society.
And the human cost of that march?
It was staggering. The best estimates are that around 4,000 men, women, and children died on that brutal forced march to Oklahoma. And this final act of removal, of course, opened up even more land for Anglo-American settlement and cotton planting.
So by 1860, that economic and cultural split brings the state to a breaking point. The sources describe Tennessee as a house divided against itself.
A political catastrophe waiting to happen. West and Middle Tennessee, with their economies completely tied to cotton in the Deep South, they overwhelmingly favored secession. But East Tennessee was staunchly pro-Union.
This internal fight is why Tennessee was so late to secede.
Exactly. It was the very last state to leave the Union, only joining the Confederacy in June of 1861. And only after a second statewide referendum.
What changed between the first and second vote?
Lincoln's call for federal troops to put down the rebellion after Fort Sumter. That pushed a lot of conditional Unionists in Middle Tennessee over the edge, and they flipped their vote.
But even after seceding, a huge number of Tennesseans fought for the Union.
Tennessee provided more soldiers for the Union Army than any other Confederate state. It was just a deeply, painfully fractured place.
And despite being late to the game, the state became one of the most critical theaters of the entire war.
It saw more military engagements than any other state except Virginia. Its rivers and its railroad network made it strategically vital for both sides.
And the Union recognized that early on.
Very early. General Ulysses S. Grant scored these crucial victories in February 1862, capturing Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. That immediately opened up the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers to the Union Navy, giving them a highway deep into the South.
That success was followed by the Battle of Shiloh, which was just unbelievably bloody.
Shiloh, in April 1862, was a national trauma. It was one of the first truly massive battles, and at the time, it was the bloodiest single engagement in American history. It shocked everyone and proved this was going to be a long, brutal war.
After Shiloh, the Union captures Memphis.
Right. By June, Memphis falls, which secures the western border and the Mississippi River for the Union. The war then grinds on, and the focus shifts to the strategic prize in the east.
Chattanooga.
Chattanooga. It was a critical railroad hub, the gateway to the Deep South. The Chattanooga campaign in late 1863 was a decisive Union victory, culminating in these dramatic battles at Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge.
And capturing Chattanooga basically sealed the Confederacy's fate.
It did. It allowed General William T. Sherman to use it as a base to launch his destructive March to the Sea in 1864, which just crippled the Confederacy's ability to wage war.
Now, Tennessee's political status during the war was unique because it was occupied by Union forces so early, and that led to a totally different path to abolition.
This is a huge, often missed point. Because Union armies held large parts of the state, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation didn't actually apply there.
So how did slavery end?
It was done by the state itself. The military governor, Andrew Johnson, a Unionist from East Tennessee, he declared slaves free in 1864. Then, in early 1865, the state legislature passed a state constitutional amendment to prohibit slavery, which the voters ratified.
So Tennessee was the only southern state to abolish slavery on its own before the 13th Amendment was even ratified.
Exactly. And they gave it a unique, though short-lived, advantage during Reconstruction. By ratifying the 14th Amendment quickly, it was the first Confederate state readmitted to the Union in 1866. And crucially, it was the only one that didn't have to have a military governor.
But that period of radical Republican control was very brief, and the backlash was immediate and violent.
The Ku Klux Klan was founded in December 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. It started as a social club for Confederate veterans, but it very quickly morphed into a domestic terrorist organization focused on intimidating and murdering black citizens and their white allies.
And the state government couldn't stop them.
They tried, briefly, with martial law. But the Southern Democrats regained control of the legislature by 1870 and immediately began implementing the Jim Crow laws that would enforce rigid racial segregation for the next century.
That violent atmosphere, combined with these clumsy attempts at industrialization, created even more conflict. We see this with the Coal Creek War.
The Coal Creek War is this powerful, brutal story. The state was broke, so it started using a system called convict leasing.
Leasing prisoners out as labor.
Right. They leased out convicts, who were disproportionately black men, to private companies.
Yeah.
And these companies used them as strike breakers in the coal mines up in the Cumberland Mountains.
And the free miners, the workers who were on strike, they fought back.
They did, with guns.
Yeah.
In 1891 and 1892, armed miners repeatedly attacked and burned the prison stockades, freeing the convicts to prevent them from breaking the strikes. It was an organized, armed uprising against this incredibly exploitative system.
Did it work?
Ultimately, yes. The Coal Creek War was so violent and got so much attention that it helped force the state to finally end the practice of convict leasing.
A tough, brutal end to the century. But to close this section, we have to talk about the decision that gave Nashville its famous nickname.
The Athens of the South. That comes from the 1897 Tennessee Centennial Exposition. It was this huge World's Fair event, a moment of regional pride.
And the centerpiece was the Parthenon.
A full-scale, exact replica of the Parthenon in Athens. It was only supposed to be temporary, made of plaster, but it was so wildly popular that the city decided to rebuild it decades later in permanent concrete. It cemented Nashville's identity as a center for higher education and classical ideals.
Okay, so moving into the 20th century, all these internal tensions, the rural versus urban, tradition versus modernity, they just explode onto the national stage, starting with huge social changes.
Right. The early 20th century sees Jim Crow laws become fully entrenched. And this leads to the first big wave of the Great Migration. Thousands of black Tennesseans just left.
Fleeing to the north.
Fleeing to industrial cities in the North and Midwest, looking for jobs, but also just escaping the constant threat of violence and oppression. At the same time, you had this big internal migration of poor white families from rural East Tennessee into the growing cities like Knoxville and Chattanooga.
And while all this is happening, the temperance movement just has a death grip on state politics.
Tennessee became a national leader in prohibition. Through a series of state laws, they became the first state to effectively ban the sale and production of alcohol, well before national prohibition even started.
Which, of course, didn't stop people from drinking.
It just drove it underground, and it fueled the moonshine economy. The geographic isolation of the East Tennessee mountains was the perfect cover for making and distributing illicit liquor, a tradition that was already deeply rooted there.
Then in 1920, Tennessee finds itself playing the single most crucial role in the national suffrage movement.
This is an incredible story. Tennessee was the pivotal 36th and final state needed to ratify the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote nationwide. The whole country was watching.
And the vote in the legislature was razor thin.
It was. Pro- and anti-suffrage lobbyists swarmed Nashville that summer. It all came down to a single vote from a young legislator from East Tennessee named Harry Byrne.
And what made him change his vote?
He got a note from his mother that morning urging him to be a good boy and vote for ratification. He changed his vote to yes at the last minute. Without that single vote in that one state, the entire movement would have been delayed for who knows how long.
Just 5 years later, the state is again the absolute focal point of a massive national culture war, the Scopes trial.
The Scopes monkey trial. And this is no accident. It was deliberately set up by the ACLU to challenge a new state law, the Butler Act, which made it illegal to teach human evolution in public schools.
So they found a teacher, John Scopes, who was willing to be the test case.
Exactly. And it became this huge spectacle, pitting two legal giants against each other. William Jennings Bryan, the three-time presidential candidate for the prosecution.
And the famous defense attorney Clarence Darrow for the defense.
The media circus. Darrow even called Bryan to the witness stand as an expert on the Bible and just cross-examined him into knots. It was incredible theater.
And while Scopes was technically found guilty,
He was, though it was overturned on a technicality. The trial itself highlighted this deep, deep tension between modern scientific thought and rural, traditional religious values that really defined the national perception of the South for decades.
this cultural upheaval then transitions into a period of just radical federal intervention during the Great Depression. Let's really get into the TVA.
The Tennessee Valley Authority. Created in 1933, it was one of the most ambitious and transformative parts of Roosevelt's New Deal. And it was so much more than just building power plants.
It was a regional planning agency.
A vast one. Its mission was to solve the endemic poverty and lack of infrastructure across a 7-state region. But its heart was in Tennessee.
What was the scope beyond just electricity?
It was immense. They were tasked with flood control, which meant building a massive system of dams. They were improving river navigation for commerce. They were developing new fertilizers to help farmers, reforesting the land, and, yes, electrifying the entire region, bringing cheap power to rural areas that had never had it before.
But that modernization, that power, it came at a massive human cost for the people who lived along those rivers.
That is the dark side of this incredible story. To create the vast reservoirs for the dams, the TVA used the power of eminent domain to forcibly displace thousands and thousands of families.
They just flooded their homes.
They flooded their homes, their farms, entire communities that had been there for generations. It was a trade-off. Economic progress and safety from floods against profound local upheaval and the destruction of a traditional way of life.
And that abundance of cheap TVA power then attracted the world's most secretive and consequential project, the Manhattan Project.
Yes, the establishment of Oak Ridge. This was arguably the single most world-altering investment in Tennessee history. This city, this community, was built from scratch in total secrecy to house the Clinton Engineer Works.
Which was for uranium enrichment.
For enriching uranium for the first atomic bomb. At its peak, Oak Ridge had 75,000 residents, but it was deliberately left off all state maps. No one knew what was happening there.
Why there? Why Tennessee?
3 main reasons. First, the guaranteed, almost limitless supply of cheap TVA electricity needed to run the massive enrichment facilities. Second, low population density to minimize risk and local knowledge. And third, its inland geography provided essential security from any potential enemy attack.
After the war, that scientific infrastructure didn't just disappear.
It transitioned seamlessly into the Cold War. The facilities became the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, or ORNL. It grew into one of the largest and most important national labs in the country.
And it still is today.
It anchors the entire Tennessee technology corridor near Knoxville. It's a global leader in materials science, nuclear physics, supercomputing. It represents this unbelievable transformation from a mostly agrarian state to a high-tech research hub in barely 50 years.
But that stunning progress didn't erase those old social divisions, which leads right into the civil rights battles of the mid-century.
The tension was immediate. And interestingly, the first integration battles happened in those very modern, federally supported communities.
Yeah.
Oak Ridge High School was the first in the state to integrate in 1955.
But it wasn't always peaceful.
No. When nearby Clinton High School integrated the next year, it required the National Guard to be called in to put down violent pro-segregationist riots.
And the struggle quickly moved to the big cities, especially Nashville.
The Nashville student movement sit-ins in 1960 are considered a masterclass in nonviolent direct action. Led by young leaders like John Lewis, they conducted these disciplined sit-ins at segregated downtown lunch counters.
And they were met with violence.
Often, yes. But they persisted, and by May of that year, Nashville became the first major southern city to begin desegregating its public facilities. It was a huge victory.
The decade ends, though, with one of the movement's greatest tragedies.
The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis in 1968. He was there to support the striking African-American sanitation workers who were protesting just inhumane working conditions. His murder there is this brutal reminder of how persistent that injustice was.
Beyond social justice, Tennessee's own political structure created several landmark Supreme Court cases that reshaped the entire country. Let's start with Baker v. Carr.
This came about because Tennessee's state legislature had refused for decades to redraw its legislative districts.
So the maps were totally out of date.
Completely. Rural areas that had lost population for years were dramatically overrepresented compared to the booming cities like Memphis and Nashville. A vote in a rural county was worth far more than a vote in the city.
And the Supreme Court stepped in.
They did. In 1962, they ruled that this was unconstitutional, establishing the critical principle of one man, one vote. The case forced states all across America to redraw their political maps fairly. It profoundly changed American democracy.
You also see these challenges to government power in environmental cases?
Yes, like Citizens to Preserve Overton Park v. Volpe in 1971. Local activists in Memphis successfully sued to stop the federal government from building Interstate 40 right through the middle of their beloved city park.
And that set a major precedent.
A huge one. The court's ruling affirmed that citizens had the right to sue government agencies and that courts could review their decisions, which was a massive boost for the environmental movement.
And then, of course, there's the famous showdown with the TVA itself.
The snail darter case, TVA v. Hill in 1978. An almost finished TVA project, the Tellico Dam, was challenged because its completion would wipe out the only known habitat of a tiny endangered fish, the snail darter.
And the Supreme Court halted the $100 million project.
They did. They sided with the fish. The case was so impactful, it forced Congress to amend the Endangered Species Act. It showed that even an agency as powerful as the TVA was now subject to environmental law.
Closing out the century, the sources mention the 1982 World's Fair in Knoxville.
Yeah, the theme was Energy Turns the World, which was a perfect fit, right? It was a really successful event that reinforced Tennessee's identity as the center of energy generation and R&D, connecting the legacy of TVA and Oak Ridge right to the national stage.
Finally, a really sobering reminder of the risks of that energy reliance. The Kingston spill in 2008.
An environmental disaster on an immense scale. A dike at the TVA's Kingston fossil plant failed, releasing over 1 billion gallons of toxic coal ash slurry into the Emery River.
1 billion gallons.
It was the largest industrial waste spill in U.S. history. The cleanup cost over $1 billion, and it highlighted the ongoing environmental dangers associated with the state's reliance on fossil fuels, even as it championed its nuclear and hydropower.
It's so clear that everything in Tennessee, the history, the economy, the politics, it's all dictated by the land itself. So let's really dive into that geography. The state is fundamentally split into the 3 grand divisions.
And these divisions, they're more than just cultural regions. They are geographical, cultural, and unusually, they are legally mandated.
Legally mandated? What does that mean?
It's written into the state constitution. It's a direct reflection of that historical separation and rivalry. For example, the state Supreme Court has 5 justices, and the law mandates that no more than 2 of them can come from the same grand division.
Wow, so they're constitutionally forced to maintain geographic balance on the highest court.
Exactly. It's designed to mitigate those old political rivalries between East, Middle, and West.
That's fascinating. Okay, so let's walk through them, starting with East Tennessee.
East Tennessee is all about the mountains. You have the Blue Ridge Mountains, which include the state's highest peaks, like Kuohi, formerly Clingman's Dome.
And this is where you find the Great Smoky Mountains National Park,
which is remarkably the most visited national park in the entire United States. It gets millions more visitors every year than the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone.
Incredible.
And then just west of the Blue Ridge, the landscape shifts into these long, linear, parallel ridges and valleys. That's the Tennessee Valley, part of the greater Appalachian system.
Okay, so moving west from there, we enter Middle Tennessee, the region around Nashville.
And this region has a really unique geology, almost like a bullseye. It's defined by the Highland Rim, which is this elevated plain that completely surrounds a central depression called the Nashville Basin.
The geology of that basin is the key. It's all limestone.
Very porous, shallow limestone bedrock. and that means you get what's called karst topography. Lots and lots of caves. Tennessee has over 10,000 documented caves, which is the most of any state in the U.S. It also means you have tons of sinkholes, underground streams. It's a landscape that is literally hollow underneath.
And finally, West Tennessee is just a complete contrast to the mountains and the hills.
West Tennessee is defined by flatness. It's almost entirely within the Gulf Coastal Plain, and as you get to the very edge of the state, it transitions into the Mississippi alluvial plain, or what people just call the Mississippi bottoms.
This is the super fertile land.
Created by millennia of sediment deposited by the Mississippi River, which forms the state's entire western border. This is the prime agricultural land, connecting right back to that 19th century cotton economy.
We also have to talk about something people might not associate with a state this far inland: earthquakes.
There are two very active seismic zones. The Eastern Tennessee seismic zone runs along the mountains and produces a lot of frequent small quakes. But the one that generates real concern is the New Madrid seismic zone.
In the far northwest corner of the state.
Correct. And that zone produced one of the most violent series of earthquakes in North American history, back in 1811 and 1812.
These were massive.
So powerful, they supposedly rang church bells in Boston, and they temporarily made the Mississippi River flow backward. The most famous legacy is Reelfoot Lake, which was formed when the land literally dropped during the quake and the Mississippi River filled it in.
The power of water is just undeniable there, which brings us right back to the state's original name, where the waters meet.
It's so fitting. The state is trisected by these major river systems. The Tennessee River itself is formed right in Knoxville. The Cumberland River flows through Nashville. And of course, the mighty Mississippi drains the entire western part of the state.
This incredible range of terrain, from the highest peaks in the east to the flat plains in the west, it must translate to incredible biodiversity.
It does. And this is a key takeaway from the sources. Tennessee is confirmed as the single most biodiverse inland state in the entire U.S.
That's a huge claim.
It is, and it's backed up by these really unique ecosystems.
Give us some examples.
Okay, so the Great Smoky Mountains National Park isn't just the most visited, it's also recognized as the most biologically diverse national park in the world. And it is home to more species of salamanders than any other place on the planet.
The salamander capital of the world.
Literally.
Yeah.
And then there's the Duck River, which flows through Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
It is officially cited as the single most biologically diverse waterway in all of North America.
And you mentioned the unique plant life in the Nashville Basin.
Yes, the Cedar Glades. These are these really special ecosystems where the limestone bedrock is so shallow that deep soil can't form. The conditions are incredibly harsh, like a desert, which results in these unique plant communities with lots of endemic species plants found nowhere else on Earth. It's a truly special place ecologically.
So all of that geography, all that history, it defines Tennessee's modern economy. And when you look at its fiscal profile, it seems, well, contradictory. The state is marketed as this low-tax, business-friendly haven.
And it is. They've done a really excellent job cultivating that reputation. It consistently ranks in the top 5 states for the lowest overall tax burden on its citizens. And fiscally, it's ranked as one of the healthiest states in the nation.
Okay, but here's the part that gets confusing. If they have no general income tax, how do they pay for everything? How do they fund massive government operations?
The paradox is resolved by looking at what they do tax. Tennessee is one of only 9 states with no general personal income tax. They phased out the last little bit of it in 2021.
So where does the money come from?
They shift the tax burden almost entirely onto consumption, onto sales tax.
So when you go to buy something,
You pay one of the highest tax rates in the country. Tennessee has the highest average combined state and local sales tax rate in the nation. It hovers around 9.5%.
so this low tax reputation really depends on who you are.
Exactly. It's a structure that places a disproportionately heavy burden on lower-income residents, who spend a much larger percentage of their income on basic goods. It's a critical part of their business-friendly model, which also includes being a right-to-work state, leading to very low rates of unionization.
Okay, let's move to agriculture. Is that old 19th century agrarian economy still a major factor?
Oh, absolutely. Agriculture is still immense. It generates an estimated economic impact of over $80 billion a year and covers more than 40% of the state's land.
What are the big commodities now? Is it still cotton?
It's more diversified now. The top commodity is actually beef cattle, followed very closely by broilers and poultry. But those traditional cash crops are still very much present. Soybeans and corn are the most common field crops.
And cotton is still a player.
A huge player. Tennessee still ranks 7th in the nation for cotton production, almost all of it concentrated in those fertile plains of West Tennessee. Tobacco is also still significant, ranking 4th nationwide.
And the Nashville Basin supports its own specialized kind of agriculture.
The great pasture land there makes it a top equestrian region. It's famous as the birthplace of the Tennessee walking horse. And fun fact, the state also ranks 2nd in the nation for mule breeding.
Shifting to manufacturing, the sources all say the automotive sector is the absolute backbone of the modern economy.
It is the largest manufacturing sector, and it's one of the most concentrated in the entire world. You have these massive plants from Nissan, General Motors, and Volkswagen.
The Nissan plant in Smyrna is huge, right?
It's the largest automotive assembly plant in all of North America by volume. It's a massive ecosystem.
And it's still growing, with Ford's new investment.
Ford is building what they call Blue Oval City. It's this mega campus out in West Tennessee, set to open in 2025. It's all part of this strategy that's made Tennessee a global hub for auto production, thanks to low costs and that non-union labor force.
Beyond cars, what other big industries are there?
You see major corporate headquarters spread across the state. In Memphis, you have the logistics giant FedEx. Nashville is a massive healthcare hub, home to HCA, the largest private hospital operator in the world. And in East Tennessee, you have Eastman Chemical, a huge player in chemicals and materials.
And all of this industry, all this activity, it relies heavily on the legacy of the TVA. What does the energy mix look like today?
The TVA still controls over 90% of the state's generating capacity. But what often surprises people is that Tennessee's #1 energy source is nuclear power.
Nuclear.
It accounts for over 43% of its electricity. That's a direct legacy of Oak Ridge and the scientific establishment there. After nuclear, you have coal and natural gas.
But even with all that capacity, is the state self-sufficient in energy?
It's not. Tennessee is actually a net consumer of electricity. It relies on power generated by TVA facilities in neighboring states, especially the big coal plants in Kentucky and Alabama. It just shows you how regional that TVA system really is.
We also have to touch on the environmental cost of some of the state's historical resource extraction, specifically the Copper Basin.
The Copper Basin is a really dark environmental lesson. During the Civil War, the area supplied about 90% of the Confederacy's copper, but the intensive, unregulated mining and smelting that went on for a century resulted in complete ecological devastation.
Well, what did it look like?
The pollution, the sulfur dioxide, killed every living plant. It created this barren, red, eroded moonscape that took decades and millions of dollars to remediate. It's a stark warning.
Finally, let's talk about tourism, which is the state's key cultural export.
Tourism is huge. It's consistently one of the top dozen most visited states in the country. And the attractions are spread out across those grand divisions. You have the Great Smoky Mountains in the east, which is the biggest draw.
And then the music centers.
Right. Graceland and the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, all of Nashville's attractions. And the history is built right into the tourism. The National Park Service maintains 4 major Civil War battlefields, which are huge draws. It's this perfect blend of natural beauty, deep history, and unique local culture.
The sources are just unanimous on this point. If you want to trace the roots of American popular music, you have to go through Tennessee. Its contribution is just foundational.
It is the cradle of American sound. The state played this crucial and often simultaneous role in developing blues, country, rock and roll, and soul.
Let's follow the music geographically, starting over in Memphis.
Memphis is the epicenter of the blues. Beale Street becomes world famous in the early 20th century. But the city's global impact was cemented in the 1950s at a little studio called Sun Records.
The birthplace of rock and roll?
Essentially, yes. This is where Sam Phillips launched the careers of Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins. It changed the world.
And the sound in Memphis kept evolving into soul music.
At Stax Records. Stax was one of the most important soul labels of the 50s and 60s, developing that distinctive Memphis soul sound with artists like Otis Redding and Booker T and the MGs.
Okay, so moving east from there, we find the origins of country music.
While Memphis had the blues rock fusion, the commercial birth of country music is often attributed to the 1927 Victor recording sessions in Bristol, right on the Virginia-Tennessee line.
They're Bristol sessions.
That's where they made the first commercial recordings of the Carter Family and Jimmy Rogers. But the gravitational center of the genre very quickly shifted to Nashville.
To Music City.
And Nashville earned that name largely because of one radio show, the Grand Ole Opry. It started in the 1920s, and it is still the nation's longest-running live radio show. The Opry solidified Nashville as the undisputed capital of the country music industry.
Beyond music, Nashville is also known for its universities, carrying on that Athens of the South reputation.
It's a well-deserved nickname. Nashville is home to the highly ranked Vanderbilt University. And, crucially, Tennessee is also home to 6 historically black colleges and universities, which have played just an enormous role in educating African-American leaders for over a century.
And the state has made a massive investment in educational access recently with the Tennessee Promise program.
The Tennessee Promise is nationally significant. It provides tuition-free community college or trade school for any in-state high school graduate. It's funded by the state lottery, and it's been really successful in boosting the number of residents with some post-secondary education.
What's happening with the state's population today? Is it growing?
It is one of the fastest-growing destinations in the country right now, largely fueled by domestic migration. People are moving in from the Northeast, the Midwest, California.
Drawn by the jobs and the low cost of living.
Exactly. And this is rapidly shifting the demographic profile. For instance, the Hispanic population grew by over 134% in just 10 years, between 2000 and 2010.
Turning to the government itself, the sources highlight a few really peculiar structural rules.
The capital city itself was a political football for decades. It moved 4 times before it finally settled in Nashville for good in 1843.
And there are some oddities in how the government is structured.
2 really unique practices. First, in Tennessee, the governor gets to appoint the attorney general. It's the only state that does that. Second, the Speaker of the Senate also serves as the lieutenant governor, which creates this incredibly powerful position for the majority party leader.
The state also has a very firm reputation for strict criminal punishment.
Capital punishment is legal, and they still use it. A stark example is the upcoming execution date for Krista Gale Pike, who, if it goes forward, would be the first woman executed in the state in over 200 years.
Finally, let's really analyze the massive political shift that has happened over the last few decades. It's transformed Tennessee from a competitive swing state into a solid Republican bastion.
Historically, for most of the 20th century, Tennessee was a swing state. It would elect moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans, like Senator Howard Baker, who was known as the Great Conciliator.
The end of that era really starts with the 2000 presidential election.
That's the turning point. Al Gore, a former senator from Tennessee, the sitting vice president, failed to carry his own home state against George W. Bush.
And that loss was a symptom of a much bigger realignment.
It was. Rural white voters, especially in Middle and West Tennessee, who had been Democrats for generations, began rejecting the National Democratic Party over social and cultural issues, and they shifted their loyalty decisively to the Republican Party.
And that transition happened fast.
Very fast. Since 2000, it has become one of the most reliably Republican states in the country. The current federal representation reflects that completely. 8 of 9 House seats and both Senate seats are Republican.
This political climate also includes some of the country's most restrictive voter laws, which is a critical piece of this.
It is. Tennessee is one of only a handful of states that requires a photo ID to vote. But more strikingly, the state has one of the nation's highest rates of felony disenfranchisement.
What does that mean in real numbers?
It means close to 10% of the voting age population is ineligible to vote because of a prior felony conviction. And that includes the highest rate of Black and Latino felony disenfranchisement in the entire nation, which significantly impacts who gets to participate in the state's democracy.
To wrap up the culture here, we can't forget the vibrant pro-sports scene that has followed all this growth into the big cities.
The growth of the metro areas brought the major leagues. Nashville has the NFL's Titans and the NHL's Predators. Memphis has the NBA's Grizzlies. And outside of that, the state is a massive draw for motorsports. The Bristol Motor Speedway routinely sells out over 160,000 seats for NASCAR. It's that perfect mix of modern growth and deep-rooted tradition. #outro.
What an incredible contrast. We've traced this journey from ancient hunting grounds and that rugged, self-governing frontier through the absolute fracture of the Civil War and into its current status as this industrial, high-tech cultural powerhouse.
The duality is just unmistakable. You have a state that cherishes the traditions of the Grand Ole Opry and its Appalachian past, while at the same time housing the birthplace of the atomic bomb and some of the most powerful supercomputers on Earth at Oak Ridge.
Right, and that tension between its low-tax, anti-union economic model and its profound historical reliance on these massive federal government projects like the TVA, that defines its very existence.
It's a state that is perpetually shaped by its internal geography, that east versus middle versus west divide, and by the conflicts that grew out of that land. The Trail of Tears, the Civil War, the Coal Creek War, the Civil Rights Movement.
So the final question is, what does this ongoing tension between fierce tradition and incredibly rapid change mean for a state that is now one of the fastest growing places in the country?
If you're moving to Tennessee or even just studying it, you have to understand that you're stepping into this dynamic conflict zone. So the question for you to mull over is this. As Tennessee attracts all this new migration and capital, can this deep history of geographical and political division finally be synthesized into some kind of unified identity? Or is the state just doomed to perpetually exist as three separate and sometimes warring nations under a single flag? That internal tension might be Tennessee's most enduring export.